Hi, in this video I'll be reviewing the stories in Storm Season, the fourth volume in the Thieves World Anthology series. Storm Season contains an introduction vignette, 6 full stories, and an epilogue. Storm Season has an editor's note that reminds the reader that there may be inconsistencies in stories because of the different characters, attitudes, and perceptions involved in each story. This note also says that while the previous 3 anthologies had a consistent linear story chronology, it was more difficult to do that with this book's stories. That's okay with me because I don't mind piecing together when events in one story overlap with another story. Like the previous 2 introduction stories, the introduction of Storm Season finds Hakim the storyteller looking for a new story to tell. He's heard that Panet, a fisherman known as the Old Man, and his son Hort have disappeared. They were last seen in the story A Gift in Parting in Shadows of Sanctuary. Hakim visits the fisherman's standard hangout, which is called the Wine Barrel Tavern, and has a drink with Omat, a one-armed fisherman. This brief interaction sets up a sea mystery that's addressed by events in the epilogue, but I'll get to that later. I still think the introduction stories are a good way to set the scene of future events in each book, almost like a prologue in a fantasy novel. When I read this one, I was just hoping they would do more with it in this anthology than they did with the murders mentioned in Shadows of Sanctuary's introduction story. I'd rate this Storm Season introduction a 6 out of 10. Robert Asprin wrote that introduction story and also the first real story in the book, which is titled Exercise in Pain. Jubal the Crime Lord had a tough time in the last story he was in, which was called A Man and His God in Shadows of Sanctuary. It didn't end all that well for him. This story picks up shortly after the end of that story. Jubal and his lieutenant Salaman are holed up in a secret location and looking for a solution to heal Jubal's legs. Salaman gets a physician named Alton Stolwig to take a look, but he tries to help the infection, and there's just not much he can do to heal Jubal's injuries. Solomon then finds a healer named Vertan who uses sorcery to heal injuries, but it's going to take a while to do it. If you care about the Jubal character, this story is pretty good. It goes over his healing process and the price he ends up paying so that he can heal. If I say more than that, it might spoil it for you, so I won't. I'd rate this one a 6 out of 10. It's a good story, and there's a twist at the end, but I saw it coming, so it didn't catch me by surprise. You might rate it higher if you really liked the Jubal character. I haven't completely warmed up to him. He's a crime lord and a slaver after all, but he does make some events in Sanctuary more interesting. The next story is called Downwind and is C.J. Cherry's second story in the Sanctuary setting. Downwind starts with a mercenary and spy named Mradon Vis slumming it in Mama Becco's tavern in the Downwind area of Sanctuary. He's been waiting days for a specific person to show up, and then when that person does, he trails them to see where they go. When he finally reveals himself, Vis tells this person that he needs someone to help him get into Jubal's organization. From this point, a bunch of different threads spin out, though it isn't always clear how the threads relate to each other. As the story moves along, it switches viewpoint characters a bunch of times, and once it even avoids giving a name to the viewpoint being used. To me, the story suffered from the head hopping, and it seemed unnecessary to involve certain characters in the story at all. However, that would have probably made it too generic for readers, so maybe I'm just being too harsh. I don't know. I kind of wonder if the story wasn't longer when it was submitted and got cut down to keep the anthology from creeping beyond its expected page limit. I loved C.J. Cherry's first story set in Sanctuary, which was called Ishade. Unfortunately, the point of view, character hopping, and paragraph rereading I had to do really made Downwind a pain to follow. Because of that, I only give this story a 4 out of 10. The next story is by another returning author, Diana L. Paxson. Her last Thieves World tale introduced an artist called Lalo the Limner. She continues the adventures of Lalo in a story called A Fugitive Art. Lalo has had a pretty good life since Ina Shorel gave him a special vision to use in his paintings. A guy named Coricidius is vizier of Sanctuary, and he used to be a man of importance and rank, and he really wants to get back there. When a group of commissioners from the capital city are in town, they go to an art exhibit, and Lalo is present because he's one of the artists. One of the commissioners asks Lalo to paint him, and Lalo refuses, saying that he doesn't do portrait work. However, someone else decides that he'll do portraits whether he likes it or not. This is my favorite story in this volume. Lalo is one of the few truly likable characters in Sanctuary. He has flaws and sometimes they threaten to overwhelm him, so he struggles both internally and externally during the story. Tension develops through both dialogue and character actions, and it all leads to some heavy action at the end. Because of that, I'd rate this story a 9 out of 10. The fourth story in Storm Season is called Steel, and it was written by Lynn Abbey. Wallegren is a soldier that was first introduced in The Fruit of Enlabar in the Tales from the Unicorn book, so it's been a while since he's been in Sanctuary. He's also related to Illyra, the half-Sadanzo fortune teller that works in the Sanctuary Bazaar. This story starts with Wallegren and his band of soldiers preparing to ambush some thieves that have raided and killed other men in their group. During the ensuing battle, Wallegren ends up using a sword with a silver-green blade that was found in an old mine where the group also found a precious metal resource. Once they defeat the raiders, some clues convince Wallegren he can't trust the people employing him, so he has no choice but to take his group and go to Sanctuary. Once there, they search for someone that can turn their raw ore into precious steel. Wallegren's father has a dark past that's been hinted at in previous stories, and we learn a bit more about what he did in this story. We also learn the name of Illyra's mother, though that's really not important other than just Thieves World trivia knowledge. Another interesting bit of backstory relates to some history between Ballistris the metalsmith and Jubal the crime lord. In Shadows of Sanctuary, some mage killings were mentioned in the introduction, then next to nothing was done with the idea. The events of this story feed into the possibility that something from the sea is influencing events in Sanctuary, as was hinted at in this book's introduction. This is already a better job than was done with the mage killings thing in the previous book. The story sets the stage for bigger events with reluctant characters who won't have any choice but to deal with those events. I like the story a little bit more than average and would rate it a 7 out of 10. The next story is another Janet Morris entry called Wizard Weather. It starts off with Sime, a cursed woman and the wizard killer that was barely used in the previous book. She's at a party with Lastel, who is more commonly known as One Thumb. He's the manager of the Vulgar Unicorn. Sime does what she came to do at the party, and then the two of them leave. The focus then switches to Nico, who is one of Tempus's sacred band members. He's lost his partner during a search of a warehouse that had suspicious things in it. The man died, basically. As Tempus watches prep for the dead man's funeral, everyone suddenly freezes and a mysterious man and woman come down from a nearby hill. The man is someone that Tempus actually knows, and he wants to go after Sime without Tempus interfering. The reason behind Sime's curse is explained in more detail near the end of this story. We also get a glimpse of the Sacred Band's funeral rites when they lose one of their members. The theme of loss is covered from multiple angles in this story. One soldier losing a fellow soldier and its impact on him, a bride-to-be losing her betrothed to someone else and her desire for revenge, a loss of status accompanied by parental anger because of decisions made and how long they have to be lived with. These parts of the story are interesting and add some depth to the characters. The story is pretty good, though the multiple viewpoints can get confusing. I'm good with viewpoints jumping when there's a break in the text, but these viewpoints often jumped in the middle of a scene without any indication it was happening. The story isn't impossible to figure out, but, and maybe this will sound like an oxymoron, sometimes the use of subtext in the dialogue is so subtle that I was puzzled by conversations, even though I read them 2 or 3 times. I just had to hope that later parts of the story would clue me in to what I was missing. The one big complaint I have about this story is one I've raised with at least one other story in Thieves World. I just don't like it when the gods are too involved in a story or when contention between them is a major plot point. Despite that last gripe, I'd rate Wizard Weather a 7 out of 10. The last full story in Storm Season is called Godson. It was written by Andrew Offutt and features Hans, aka Shadowspawn, as the main character. The story starts with Nico training Hans to fight with a sword. Hans seems to be a natural at it, and he's driven by some secret plan that you're not aware of as the reader. Then we get a flashback that probably takes up half the story. In the flashback, Manuriel, who is the daughter of a Sadanzo fortune teller named Moonflower, gives Hans a piece of clothing and speaks in a voice that is obviously not hers. She directs Hans to Eagle's Nest, where there's a fortune in gold and silver that he can't get to waiting at the bottom of a well. The story is a bit confusing because of the flashback. I'm guessing it was written the way it was because the training Nico provides was actually promised in the story Wizard Weather. It may take a moment to realize Hans is reviewing recent events once he starts referencing Manuriel. The middle happens before the beginning. It was Pulp Fiction-ish before Pulp Fiction was a movie. There's an entire discussion about paradox and its impact on the battle that happens in the story. Once again, we have a story where the gods are mucking around with mortals and using them for their own ends. As previously stated, not a huge fan of this. I'm just not. At least the way this story ends implies that maybe this God in the mix thing won't be such a central plot element moving forward. I see this as a good thing. As I said earlier, the editor's note in Storm Season said the timeline for the stories in Storm Season was difficult. I'm not sure why. The last story overlaps somewhat with the previous story and explains why Hans, who hadn't shown any real interest in sword fighting skills before, suddenly needs sword fighting skills. Beyond that, I thought everything else was fairly linear. Of course, I'm looking at it with the hindsight of someone reading a finished product. I'm sure Lynn Abbey and Robert Asprin were getting things piecemeal and coordinating various story adjustments with the authors. Hans is my favorite character, but the writing in this one just left me cold. Halfway through, I just wanted the story to move on and be done with it. This might be because I'm reading these anthologies one after another, so I'm getting them rapid fire. It's more likely that I just really don't like the direction everything that Hans and Tempus are involved in is taking. Hopefully, gods using men and/or Sanctuary as a battleground will be done for a while. I'd give this one a 4 out of 10. In the uncredited epilogue, the threat from the sea finally approaches Sanctuary in the form of over 100 ships that resemble the ships of the fish-eyed folk. So the hint in the introduction story actually becomes a reality. A bunch of brief sections in the epilogue show the reactions of various residents like Shadowspawn, Illyra, Prince Catechithus, and Hakim the Storyteller. It's all world development that sets the stage for the next volume in Thieves World, which is The Face of Chaos. I liked the diverse reactions of the different familiar characters and thought they were all in line with each character's personality. Even though there isn't a real story there, I'd rate the epilogue a 6 out of 10 because of the work it does setting up the next set of stories. That wraps up the individual story reviews. Overall, I liked Storm Season a little bit better than Shadows of Sanctuary, though it was still a bit uneven. My overall rating of this volume is 6 out of 10. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the review, and if you haven't seen the other videos in this series, you can check them out on my channel. Bye for now.